The great hall of the Galactic Concord stretched for miles. Its walls were made of living crystal that had grown for 10,000 years. Light from distant stars passed through the ceiling and painted patterns on the floor. 1,000 species had gathered here today. They sat in floating chairs that moved without sound. They breathed different gases and saw with different eyes, but they all looked at the same thing. They looked at the humans. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the center of the hall. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes. Behind her stood 12 other humans. They were all that remained of Earth's diplomatic team. Around them, the representatives of 1,000 worlds watched in silence. The High Arbiter floated above them all. He was old beyond counting. His body was made of light and metal, and things that had no name in any human language. He had ruled the Concord for longer than humanity had existed. His voice filled the hall like thunder. "The judgment has been made," the High Arbiter said. "The species known as humanity is found guilty. They are too dangerous. They are too unpredictable. They cannot be trusted with the stars." Sarah Chen did not move. She had known this was coming. They all had. "We have watched your kind for 300 years, the High Arbiter continued. "We watched you split the atom and use it to burn your own cities. We watched you poison your own world. We watched you fight wars over lines drawn in dirt. We gave you a chance to join us. We gave you colonies among the stars. And what did you do?" He paused. The silence was heavy. "You fought each other. Even here. Even among the stars. You brought your wars with you. You brought your chaos. You brought your fire." Sarah stepped forward. "High Arbiter, if I may speak." "You may not." His voice crashed like a wave. "The time for speaking has passed. The Concord has voted. The decision is final." Around the hall, the representatives of 1,000 worlds nodded. Some looked sad. Some looked relieved. Most looked like they did not care at all. Humanity was young. Humanity was small. Humanity did not matter. "Your colonies will be taken from you," the High Arbiter declared. "Your ships will be destroyed. Your people will be gathered and returned to your homeworld. And then you will be sealed away." "Sealed away?" Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "What does that mean?" "There is a place at the edge of the galaxy. We call it the Veil. It is a region of dead stars and empty worlds. Nothing of value exists there. You will be sent there. All of you. Every human in the galaxy will be pushed beyond the Veil, and then we will close the door behind you." "For how long?" The High Arbiter's light flickered. "It might have been laughter. Forever, Ambassador Chen. Or until your species learns humility. Whichever comes first." Sarah looked at the faces around her. 1,000 species. 1,000 worlds. Not one of them would speak for humanity. Not one of them would stand up and say this was wrong. "You are making a mistake," she said quietly. "Perhaps," the High Arbiter replied. "But it will be your mistake to live with, not ours. Take them away." Guards made of metal and light surrounded the human delegation. They were gentle but firm. There was no point in fighting. There was nowhere to run. Sarah Chen took one last look at the great hall of the Galactic Concord. She tried to remember every detail. The living crystal walls, the floating chairs, the light from distant stars. She knew she would never see any of it again. The journey back to Earth took 3 months. The Concord ships were fast, but they took the long way. They wanted the humans to see what they were losing. Colony after colony passed by the windows, worlds that humans had built with their own hands, cities that had taken generations to grow. Farms and factories and homes, all of them were empty now. The Concord had worked quickly. By the time the judgment was announced, the evacuation had already begun. Millions of humans were loaded onto transport ships. They were allowed to take nothing but the clothes on their backs. Everything else was left behind. Everything else belonged to the Concord now. Sarah watched a world called New Helsinki disappear behind them. She had visited there once, years ago. The people there had built a city inside a mountain. They had learned to grow food in caves lit by artificial suns. They had been so proud of what they had made. Now it was gone. All of it. Gone. "Ambassador Chen." One of her aides approached. His name was James, and he was young, too young for this. "We're receiving reports from the other transports. The evacuation is almost complete. They estimate that 98% of all humans have been gathered. And the other 2%? James looked away. They resisted. The conquered forces. They didn't take prisoners." Sarah closed her eyes. 2% of all humans in the galaxy. That was millions of people. Millions of people who had refused to go quietly. Millions of people who had fought back against the judgment. Millions of people who were now dead. How long until we reach Earth? She asked. 6 more weeks. The Concorde wants all the transports to arrive at the same time. They say it will be symbolic. Symbolic. Sarah almost laughed. The Concorde was very good at symbols. They were very good at making things look important and meaningful. They were very good at everything, except mercy. The transports arrived at Earth on a Tuesday. It was raining in Geneva, where the old United Nations building still stood. Sarah remembered reading about the United Nations in school. It had been humanity's first attempt at global cooperation. It had failed, of course. Everything humanity tried seemed to fail eventually. Maybe the Concorde was right. Maybe humans really were too dangerous, too chaotic, too broken. The ships descended through the clouds. Billions of humans looked up and watched them come. They had been watching the skies for weeks, waiting, hoping, praying that somehow the judgment would be reversed, that somehow they would be given another chance. But there were no more chances. The transports landed, and the exiles came home. Families that had been separated for generations were reunited. Children met grandparents they had only seen in pictures. It should have been a happy moment, but no one was smiling. No one was celebrating. They all knew what came next. The Concorde fleet appeared 3 days later. There were thousands of ships. They surrounded Earth like a cage. They surrounded the entire solar system. And then, they began to build. The barrier took a year to complete. It was made of technology so advanced that human scientists could not even begin to understand it. It bent space and time. It created walls that had no thickness but could not be crossed. It sealed Earth and its people away from the rest of the galaxy as completely as if they had never existed. On the last day, the High Arbiter appeared in the sky above every city on Earth. His image was 100 miles tall. His voice shook the ground. "Humanity," he said, "you have been judged and found wanting. You have been given the gift of the stars, and you have wasted it. Now you will learn what it means to be alone. Now you will learn what it means to be forgotten." He paused. The whole world held its breath. Perhaps in 10,000 years, you will be ready to try again. Perhaps your children's children's children will be wiser than you. We shall see. Until then, you are nothing. You are no one. You are cast out and forgotten. The image faded. The sky went dark. And then the Concorde fleet was gone. Sarah Chen stood on the roof of the old United Nations building and watched the stars disappear. Not literally, they were still there, pinpricks of light in the night sky. But they were further away now. They were unreachable. They belonged to someone else. Around her, people were crying. Some were screaming. Some were praying. Some were just standing in silence, staring at the sky with empty eyes. James found her an hour later. His face was wet with tears. "What do we do now, Ambassador?" Sarah thought about the question for a long time. What did they do now? They had lost everything. Their colonies, their ships, their future. They had been thrown into the dark and told to stay there forever. What did they do now? She looked at James. She looked at the crying, screaming, praying masses below. She looked at the stars that were no longer theirs, and then she smiled. It was a small smile. A tired smile. But it was real. "We survive," she said. "That's what we do now. We survive. We adapt. We grow. And one day, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not for 100 years, but one day, we find our way back." James stared at her. "How? The barrier is impossible to break. The Concorde technology is thousands of years ahead of ours. We don't even understand how it works." "Then we learn," Sarah said. "We study. We experiment. We fail. And we try again. That's what humans do. James, that's what we've always done. We don't know how to give up. We don't know how to stay beaten. It's our greatest strength and our greatest weakness." The Concorde said it would take 10,000 years. Sarah's smile grew wider. "Then we'd better get started." That night, all across Earth, the fires burned. Not fires of destruction, fires of determination. People gathered around them and talked. They made plans. They made promises. They swore oaths to themselves and to each other. The Concorde thought humanity would break. They thought the exile would crush the human spirit. They thought 10,000 years in the dark would teach humanity humility. They were wrong. Humanity had been beaten before. Humanity had faced extinction before. Ice ages, plagues, wars. Every time, they had been pushed to the edge. Every time, they had found a way back. This would be no different. In a small laboratory in what used to be called Japan, a young physicist named Kenji Tanaka began studying the barrier. He had no equipment, no funding, no support. He had only his mind and his determination. He would spend the next 40 years of his life trying to understand the Concorde's technology. He would fail, but his students would continue his work, and their students would continue after them. In what used to be called Brazil, a farmer named Maria Santos began experimenting with new crops. The barrier had done something to the sun. The light was different now. The old crops wouldn't grow the same way. Maria didn't understand the science, but she understood plants. She would spend the rest of her life learning how to feed a world that had been changed forever. In what used to be called Canada, a politician named William Crow began building something new. The old nations were gone. The old borders didn't matter anymore. They were all in this together now. They needed a new kind of government, a new kind of unity. William didn't know what it would look like, but he knew it had to exist. Otherwise, humanity would tear itself apart before the conquered ever had a chance to come back. All across the world, the work began. It was slow. It was hard. It was often hopeless. But it was work. It was movement. It was life. The conquered had cast humanity out. They had sealed them in the dark. They had forgotten about them. But humanity had not forgotten. They remembered the stars. They remembered the colonies. They remembered the judgment that had been passed upon them. And they remembered the High Arbiter's words. Perhaps in 10,000 years. Sarah Chen died 23 years after the exile. She was buried in a small cemetery overlooking the ocean. Her gravestone was simple. It said only her name and 2 dates. But on the back, someone had carved a message. No one knew who had done it. It just appeared one morning, as if by magic. The message said, "She never gave up. Neither should you." People came from all over the world to see it. They touched the words with their fingers. They said prayers. They made promises. And then they went back to work. The first century of the exile had begun. Humanity was not broken. They were just getting started. 50 years after the exile, the first war began. It started over water. The barrier had changed Earth's climate in ways no one fully understood. Some places that had been wet became dry. Some places that had been cold became hot. The old patterns didn't work anymore. And when the water started running out in some regions, people started fighting. The war lasted 3 years. It killed 20 million people. And when it was over, nothing had changed. The water was still running out. The climate was still broken. And now, there were 20 million fewer hands to fix it. Maria Santos's granddaughter, Elena, stood in a field of dead crops and cried. She was 42 years old. She had spent her entire life trying to continue her grandmother's work. New crops, new farming methods, new ways to feed a hungry world. And now this, "We're going to die," she said to her husband, Carlos. "All of us. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. We're going to die, and no one is going to remember we ever existed." Carlos put his arm around her. He was a big man with rough hands and gentle eyes. He had been a soldier in the war. He had seen things no one should ever see. But he had come home. He had put down his weapon and picked up a plow. He had chosen to build instead of destroy. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe not. My grandfather used to say that humans are too stubborn to die. He said we're like weeds. You can cut us down, you can burn us, you can poison us, but we always come back." Elena wiped her eyes. "Your grandfather was a fool, probably," Carlos agreed, "but he was a happy fool. And he died in his sleep at the age of 93. There are worse things to be." A messenger arrived the next morning. He came from the new capital, the city that had once been called Geneva. He brought news that would change everything. The war had ended, but the fighting had not stopped. Small groups of soldiers had refused to lay down their weapons. They had become bandits, raiders, terrorists. They attacked farms and factories. They burned what they could not steal. They killed anyone who tried to stop them. The new government, the Terran Compact, had tried to stop them. But the compact was weak. It had been built from the ashes of the old nations, and it had no real power. It could make suggestions, it could ask for cooperation, but it could not force anyone to do anything. Until now. The compact has declared martial law, the messenger said. All soldiers are being called back to service. All weapons are being collected. All resources are being pooled. We are done fighting each other. From now on, we fight together or we die apart. Elena and Carlos looked at each other. They had heard promises like this before. They had seen leaders rise and fall. They had watched hope bloom and wither 100 times. But something in the messenger's voice was different this time. Something in his eyes. Who gave this order? Carlos asked. Her name is Amara Okafor, the messenger said. She was a general in the war. She lost her husband and 3 children. She says she will not lose anyone else. She says humanity has one last chance. She says we take it together or we don't take it at all. Amara Okafor was not a politician. She did not know how to make pretty speeches or shake hands with important people. She was a soldier. She knew how to fight, how to lead, how to sacrifice, and she knew how to make hard choices. Her first choice was the hardest. The bandits and raiders had to be stopped. But they were humans too. They were people who had lost everything in the war. They were people who had been pushed past the breaking point. Amara could have hunted them down and killed them all. Many of her advisors told her to do exactly that. Instead, she offered them a choice. Come back, she said in a message broadcast across the world. Come back and help us build. The war is over. The fighting is done. I know you are angry. I know you are hurt. I know you have done terrible things. But so have I. So have all of us. We have all been broken by this exile. Now it is time to put the pieces back together. Some of the bandits refused. They attacked Amara's forces and were destroyed. But most of them came back. They came out of the mountains and the forests and the ruins. They came with their weapons in their hands and shame in their eyes. Amara met every single one of them personally. She shook their hands. She looked into their eyes. She told them the same thing she told everyone. The past is gone. The future is all that matters. Now get to work. The rebuilding took decades. There were setbacks and failures. There were times when it seemed like everything would fall apart again. But somehow, it never did. Somehow, humanity held together. The Terran Compact grew stronger. It was not a government like the old nations had been. It did not have presidents or kings or dictators. Instead, it was a network, a web of connections and agreements. Cities and regions made their own decisions, but they all agreed on certain basic rules: share resources, protect each other, work toward common goals. It was messy. It was chaotic. It was very, very human. And it worked. 100 years after the exile, the first ship left Earth. It was not a pretty ship. It was made of scraps and salvage, pieces of the old colonial fleet that the Concorde had left behind. It had no weapons. It had barely enough fuel to reach the edge of the solar system. Its crew was 12 volunteers who knew they might never come back. Elena Santos's great-granddaughter, Lucia, was one of them. Why are you doing this? Her mother asked before she left. There's nothing out there. The Concorde took everything. There's nothing but dead worlds and empty space. Lucia smiled. She had her great-great-grandmother's eyes, brown and warm and full of hope. That's not true, she said. There's the barrier. There's the edge of our cage, and I want to see it with my own eyes. I want to touch it with my own hands. I want to understand it. So you can break it? So we can break it. Someday. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. The ship was called the Maria Santos, after the woman who had first learned to grow food in the changed world. It was a good name, a hopeful name. The journey took 3 months. 3 months of darkness and silence and the cold, empty void between worlds. The crew played cards and told stories and tried not to think about how small they were, how alone, and then they saw it, the barrier. It looked like nothing. That was the strangest part. It looked like empty space, black and cold and infinite. But when you looked closer, you could see it. A shimmer, a ripple, like heat rising from hot ground, like a dream you couldn't quite remember. Lucia pressed her hand against the viewport. The barrier was 1,000,000 miles away, but she could feel it. She could feel it pushing against her mind, telling her to turn back, telling her she didn't belong. It's real, she whispered. It's actually real. I always knew it was, but seeing it is different. The captain, A man named Yuri Volkov nodded. He was old. He remembered the Exile. He remembered watching the Concorde ships build the barrier. He remembered the High Arbiter's voice shaking the ground. "It's real," he agreed. "And it's strong. Stronger than anything we could ever build." But what?" Yuri smiled. It was a small smile, like the one Sarah Chen had worn on that first night of exile. Tired but real. But it was built by people. Not gods. Not demons. People. Aliens. Yes. Ancient and powerful. Yes. But still people. And anything built by people can be understood by people. Anything understood can be changed. Anything changed can be broken. They spent 2 weeks studying the barrier. They took measurements and samples and readings. They learned almost nothing. The Concorde technology was too advanced. It was like trying to understand a computer by looking at it through a microscope. But they did learn one thing. The barrier was not perfect. There were tiny fluctuations, microscopic weaknesses, places where the wall between their cage and the rest of the galaxy was thinner than others. It was not much. It was almost nothing. But it was something. It was hope. The Maria Santos returned to Earth 6 months after it left. The crew was welcomed as heroes. Lucia Santos spoke to a crowd of 10,000 people in the old United Nations building. She told them what she had seen. She told them what she had learned. "The barrier is not a wall," she said. "It is a door. A door that was locked by people who thought we were not worthy to walk among the stars. They were wrong. We are worthy. We have always been worthy. And one day, we will open that door again." The crowd cheered. They wept. They hugged each other and made promises. And then they went back to work, because that's what humans did. 200 years after the exile, the terraforming began. It started with Mars. The old colony there had been destroyed by the Concorde, but the planet itself remained. It was dead and cold and empty. The air was poison. The ground was dust. Nothing could live there. Nothing except humans. The first terraforming teams arrived in ships that were bigger and faster than anything the Maria Santos could have imagined. 2 centuries of work had changed everything. Factories hummed across Earth. Power plants burned clean and bright. Scientists understood things that had been mysteries before. They still could not break the barrier. But they had learned how to live in their cage. Mars was just the beginning. After Mars came the moons of Jupiter. After Jupiter came the asteroids. After the asteroids came the outer planets. Each new world was harder than the last. Each new world took longer to tame. But humans were patient now. They had learned patience in the long night of exile. They had learned that some things could not be rushed. Some things had to grow slowly, like crops in a field, like children in a family, like hope in a broken heart. 300 years after the exile, humanity had spread across the entire solar system. 50 billion people lived on a dozen worlds and 100 moons and 1,000 stations. They were not the same people who had been cast out of the galaxy. They were different, harder, stronger, more united, and they had not forgotten. Every year, on the anniversary of the exile, the entire species paused. Factories went quiet. Schools closed. People gathered in public spaces and looked up at the sky. They told stories about the old days. They remembered the colonies that had been taken. They spoke the names of the millions who had died in the first years. And they made a promise, the same promise, every year, for 300 years. We will return. We will remember. We will rise. In a laboratory on the moon of Europa, a physicist named Yuki Okonkwo was working late. She was the latest in a long line of scientists who had devoted their lives to understanding the barrier. Her great-great-grandfather had been Kenji Tanaka, the young man who had started studying the barrier on the first night of exile. She had inherited his notes. Centuries of work, passed down from parent to child. Thousands of experiments, millions of failures. And slowly, a picture was beginning to form. The barrier was not unbreakable. It was just very, very complicated. The Concorde had built it using technology that bent space and time. They had created a wall that existed in multiple dimensions at once. It was strong because it was perfect. Every piece fit with every other piece. There were no gaps, no weaknesses, no flaws, or so they thought. Yuki had found something. A pattern, a rhythm. The barrier was not static. It moved. It breathed. It pulsed like a living thing. And in those pulses, there were moments, tiny, fleeting moments, When the wall was thin, she ran the calculations again, and again, and again. Each time, the answer was the same. The barrier could be broken. Not with force, not with weapons, but with understanding, with precision, with timing. It would take years to develop the technology. It would take decades to build the ships. It would take patience and sacrifice and courage, but it could be done. Yuki Okonkwo stood up from her desk. She walked to the window of her laboratory and looked out at the stars. They were the same stars that Sarah Chen had watched on that first night of exile. The same stars that the High Arbiter had said would never belong to humanity again. He was wrong. They were coming back, all of them, and this time, they would not be cast out. This time, they would stay. Yuki Okonkwo did not sleep for 3 days after her discovery. She ran the calculations 100 times. She checked every assumption. She looked for errors that were not there, and when she was finally certain, absolutely certain, she made a call. The face that appeared on her screen belonged to Admiral Chen Wei. He was an old man with white hair and sharp eyes. He was the great-great-great-grandson of Sarah Chen, the ambassador who had stood before the Concord and heard humanity's judgment. The Chen family had served the Terran Compact for 300 years. They had never forgotten their ancestors' last words. We survive, we adapt, we grow, and one day, we find our way back. That day had come. Show me, Admiral Chen said. Yuki sent him the data, the equations, the simulations, all 300 years of research, distilled into a single truth. The barrier could be broken. Admiral Chen was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was soft. How long? 10 years to develop the technology. Another 5 to build the ships. If we work fast, if we don't make mistakes, and if we do make mistakes, Yuki paused. Then we try again. We always try again. Admiral Chen smiled. It was the same smile that had been passed down through his family for generations. Tired but real. Hopeful but honest. Start immediately, he said. Use whatever resources you need, whatever people you need. This is now the highest priority of the Terran Compact. What should we call it? The project, I mean. Admiral Chen thought for a moment. Call it rekindling. We're lighting a fire that was put out 300 years ago. It's time to let it burn again. The next 10 years were the busiest in human history. Factories that had been building colony ships were converted to build something new. Something faster. Something stronger. Something that could slip through the cracks in the barrier like water through a broken dam. Scientists from every world in the solar system came together to work on the project. They argued and disagreed and sometimes threw things at each other. But they also cooperated. They shared their knowledge freely. They built on each other's work without jealousy or pride. This was how humanity had survived the long night. Not as individuals, not as nations, but as a species. Together, Yuki Okonkwo led the theoretical team. She was not a natural leader. She was quiet and awkward and preferred equations to conversations. But her mind was the sharpest in the solar system, and everyone knew it. When she spoke, people listened. The barrier is not a wall, she explained to her team on the first day. It is more like a heartbeat. It pulses. It moves. There are moments when it is strong and moments when it is weak. We need to find the weak moments and slip through before the barrier realizes what has happened. How weak are the weak moments? Someone asked. Very weak. For about 1/10 of a second, once every 7 hours, the barrier in certain spots becomes thin enough to cross, but only if you are moving at exactly the right speed, at exactly the right angle, at exactly the right time. That sounds impossible. Yuki shook her head. Nothing is impossible. It is just very, very difficult. That is a different thing. They built the technology. It took 9 years instead of 10. The ship was small, barely big enough for a crew of 6. It was not armed. It had no weapons, no shields, no way to defend itself. It was designed for only one purpose, to slip through the barrier and see what was on the other side. They called it the Needle. Admiral Chen selected the crew personally. He chose people who had no families, no children, no one who would be left behind if the mission failed. These were volunteers who understood that they might never come home. The captain was a woman named Aisha Okafor. She was the direct descendant of Amara Okafor, the general who had united humanity after the First War. Like her ancestor, she was not a politician. She was a soldier, a leader, someone who knew how to make hard choices. "Why do you want this mission?" Admiral Chen asked her during the final interview. Aisha thought for a moment. "Because someone has to go first. Someone has to take the risk. Someone has to be willing to die so that others can live. My family has always believed that. We have always served. And if you fail, if you are captured or killed, the Concord will know we are trying to escape. They will strengthen the barrier. They might even destroy us completely. They might," Aisha agreed. "But they might not. The Concord does not think about us anymore. They forgot about us centuries ago. We are nothing to them. Dust in the void. That is our greatest weakness and our greatest strength." Admiral Chen nodded slowly. "You understand the risks. I understand everything. And I am still going. My crew is still going. We will find a way through, or we will die trying. Either way, we will have tried. That is all anyone can do." The Needle launched on a Tuesday. It was the anniversary of the Exile, 315 years to the day since the Concord had sealed humanity away. 50 billion people watched the ship rise from Europa's ice fields and vanish into the black. Then they waited. The journey to the barrier took 2 weeks. Aisha and her crew spent the time running simulations and checking their equipment. They played cards and told jokes and tried not to think about what was coming. They wrote letters to people they would never see again. On the 14th day, they reached the barrier. It looked the same as it had when Lucia Santos first saw it, more than 200 years ago. Empty and cold and infinite. But Aisha knew it was not empty. She could feel it pressing against her mind, the same feeling every human had when they approached the edge of their cage. "Turn back. You don't belong here. Go home." "Systems check," she said calmly. Her crew called out their readings. Navigation was ready. Engines were ready. The timing systems were calibrated to the microsecond. "We have 3 minutes until the next weak point," her navigator reported. "The barrier fluctuation will last exactly 0.17 seconds. We need to hit it at 37,000 kilometers per second, at an angle of 47.3 degrees. And if we miss, then we hit the barrier at full speed and are instantly destroyed." Aisha nodded. "Let's not miss then." The next 3 minutes were the longest of her life. She watched the clock count down. She felt her heart beating in her chest. She thought about her family, her ancestors, all the people who had lived and died in the long night, waiting for this moment. 1 minute, 30 seconds, 10 seconds. "All crew, brace for transition," she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1. The needle shot forward. The barrier filled the viewport. For an instant, Aisha saw something that no human had seen in 300 years. She saw the galaxy. She saw the stars. She saw infinity. And then they were through. The other side of the barrier was dark, empty, silent. But it was different. Aisha could feel it in her bones. They were outside the cage now. They were free. "Report," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "All systems functional," her engineer replied. "No damage, no anomalies. We made it, Captain. We actually made it." For a long moment, no one spoke. They just stared at the stars. The same stars their ancestors had walked among 3 centuries ago. The stars that had been stolen from them. The stars that were theirs again. "Record this moment," Aisha said finally. "Record everything. The date, the time, the coordinates. This is the first moment of the rest of human history. I want it remembered." They spent 3 days exploring the space beyond the barrier. What they found shocked them. The Concord was not what it had been. Their instruments picked up signals from across the galaxy. Communications, transmissions, fragments of conversations in 1,000 languages. And what those conversations said was clear. The Concord was falling apart. 300 years ago, when they had exiled humanity, the Concord had been strong. 1,000 species united under a single rule. But unity was fragile. Time was cruel. And without an enemy to fight, the ancient races had turned on each other. Wars had erupted across the galaxy. Empires had risen and fallen. The High Arbiter who had sentenced humanity was long dead, replaced by a series of weaker leaders who could barely keep the Concord from destroying itself. And that was not all. There were other species out there. Races that the Concord had conquered and oppressed for millennia. Races that had been told they were not worthy. Races that had been forced to serve their masters without hope of freedom. races that were ready to rebel. "We need to go back," Aisha said on the third day. "We need to tell everyone what we've found. This changes everything." Her navigator hesitated. "We can't, Captain. The weak point in the barrier, it only works from the outside in. We can't go back the way we came." Aisha felt the blood drain from her face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we're stuck. We can get messages through the barrier, doesn't block radio signals completely, but we can't go home. Not unless someone figures out how to open the barrier from the other side." Silence filled the ship. The crew looked at each other. They had known this might happen. They had accepted it before they left. But knowing and experiencing were different things. "Then we send a message," Aisha said finally. "We send everything we've learned. The Concorde is weak. The galaxy is in chaos. There are allies out there, waiting for someone to help them rise. We send all of it. And we trust that the people back home will know what to do with it." They spent the next week compiling their data. Every signal they had intercepted, every analysis they had made, every observation and theory and guess. They put it all into a message and aimed it at the barrier, at the exact point where they had slipped through. "Message ready," her communications officer said. "Transmitting now." The signal vanished into the darkness. There was no way to know if it would reach home. No way to know if anyone would hear it. No way to know if it would change anything. But they had tried. That was all anyone could do. On Europa, 3 weeks later, Yuki Okonkwo's computers lit up with incoming data. She read the message from the needle. She saw what Aisha and her crew had found. She understood what it meant, and then she started to cry. Not tears of sadness, tears of joy, tears of hope, tears that had been waiting 300 years to fall. The galaxy was weak, the Concorde was dying, and humanity was ready to rise. She picked up her communicator and called Admiral Chen. "I have news," she said. "Good news, the best news." Admiral Chen listened. When she was finished, he was quiet for a long time. "What happened to the crew of the Needle?" he asked finally. "They're alive. They're out there, somewhere beyond the barrier. But they can't come home. Not yet. Then we bring them home. We open the barrier for good. We take back what was stolen from us." Yuki nodded. "It will take time. Years, maybe decades. We need to build bigger ships, better technology. We need to understand the barrier completely, not just slip through the cracks. Then we start immediately," Admiral Chen said. "We have waited 300 years. We can wait a little longer. But not too long. Our people are out there, and the galaxy is waiting." The second phase of Project Rekindling began that same day. Humanity was coming back, and this time, they were coming back for good. 20 years passed. In those 20 years, humanity changed the meaning of the word impossible. They built ships that could tear holes in the barrier, not just slip through the cracks. They developed technology that let them travel between stars in days instead of years. They created weapons that could match the Concorde's ancient war machines, but most importantly, they developed a plan. Admiral Chen had died 5 years after receiving the message from the Needle. His daughter, Admiral Lin Chen, had taken his place. She was younger than her father had been, sharper and hungrier. She had grown up hearing stories of the Exile. She had learned to hate the Concorde before she could walk, but hate was not enough. Hate could destroy, but it could not build. And what humanity needed now was not destruction. It was something much harder. They needed to make friends. "The Concorde has ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, Admiral Lin told her commanders. "They have conquered thousands of species. They have destroyed civilizations. They have crushed every rebellion before it could begin. They are powerful beyond imagination." She paused and looked at the map of the galaxy floating before her. 1,000 worlds, 1,000,000 stars, an empire that stretched across time and space. "But they are also hated," she continued. "Every species they have conquered dreams of freedom. Every world they have oppressed prays for liberation. They have enemies everywhere. They just don't know it yet." "And we do?" one of her commanders asked. "We do. The Needle crew has spent 20 years out there, gathering information, making contacts, finding allies. They are old now. They have given their lives to this mission, and they have given us something the Concorde never expected. They have given us a network." The first fleet crossed the barrier on the 335th anniversary of the Exile. It was not an invasion force. It was something much more subtle. 100 ships, carrying not weapons but supplies, medicine, food, technology, gifts, and messages. Admiral Lin had recorded a message for every species that the Needle crew had contacted. Each message was different. Each message was personal. Each message said the same thing in a different way. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. Help is coming. The ships scattered across the galaxy. They went to worlds that had been crushed by the Concord. They went to species that had been told they were worthless. They went to civilizations that had been fighting alone for centuries. And everywhere they went, they found friends. On a world called Velnar, a species of insect-like beings had been enslaved by the Concord for 2,000 years. They worked in the mines beneath the surface, digging out metals that were shipped to the elder races. They had no hope. They had no future. They had been told that this was their purpose, and they had believed it. Then the human ship arrived. Captain James Tanaka, great-great-grandson of the physicist who had first studied the barrier, stepped off the ship and onto Velnar soil. He was the first human the Velnar had ever seen. They did not know what to make of him. "My name is James," he said. "I come from a species called humanity. 300 years ago, we were cast out of the galaxy. We were told we were too dangerous, too unpredictable, too young. We were sealed in a cage and forgotten." The Velnar watched in silence. Their compound eyes showed no emotion, but their antennae were still. They were listening. "We did not die," James continued. "We survived. We grew. We learned. And now we have come back. But we have not come to conquer. We have not come to rule. We have come to help." One of the Velnar stepped forward. She was old, her shell cracked and worn from years in the mines. Her voice was like dry leaves rustling. "Why would you help us? You do not know us. You owe us nothing." James smiled. It was a strange expression to the Velnar, but somehow they understood it. "Because we know what it feels like to be cast out. We know what it feels like to be told you are worthless. We know what it feels like to be forgotten. And we know that no species deserves that. No one deserves to be alone." The old Velnar was quiet for a long time. Then she did something that no Velnar had done in 2,000 years. She laughed. "The Concord told us that aliens were monsters," she said. "They told us that if we ever tried to rise, we would be crushed by creatures even worse than them. They lied to us about many things, but this was their biggest lie." She reached out and touched James's hand. Her fingers were hard and cold, but her touch was gentle. "Welcome to Velnar, human. Welcome home." The same scene played out across the galaxy. World after world. Species after species. The Concord had spent millennia telling their subjects that they were alone, that there was no hope, that resistance was futile. Humanity proved them wrong. They did not come as conquerors. They did not demand obedience or loyalty. They came as friends. They came as equals. They came as proof that the galaxy did not have to be ruled by fear. And one by one, the oppressed peoples of the galaxy began to rise. The first rebellion started on a moon called Threshak. The species there, a race of tall, thin beings with skin like silver water, had been forced to build ships for the conquered fleet. For generations, they had worked in silence, building the very weapons that kept them enslaved. Then they stopped. One day, without warning, every factory on Threshak went quiet. Every worker put down their tools. Every ship in the production line was left unfinished. The Concord sent soldiers to restore order. They expected the rebellion to be crushed within days. They were wrong. The Threshaki did not fight with weapons. They fought with patience. They fought with unity. They hid in the tunnels beneath their cities. They sabotaged every attempt to restart the factories. They refused to work, no matter what threats were made. And when the Concord soldiers began to starve because no one would feed them, the Threshaki offered a choice. "Leave," they said. "Leave, and we will let you live. Stay, and we will bury you in the tunnels. We have nothing to lose. We have been slaves all our lives. Death is not worse than slavery." The soldiers left. News of the Threshak rebellion spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Other species heard what had happened. They saw that the Concord could be defied. They saw that freedom was possible. More rebellions followed. Some were violent, some were peaceful, some succeeded, some failed. But each one weakened the Concord a little more. Each one proved that the ancient order was crumbling, and through it all, humanity was there. They did not lead the rebellions. They did not command the armies. They did not make demands or claim victories. They simply helped. They provided supplies and technology. They carried messages between rebel groups. They offered shelter to refugees. They were the spark. The galaxy was the fire. 10 years after the first fleet crossed the barrier, Admiral Lin Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched the latest reports come in. The Conquered had lost control of 40% of the galaxy. Half their fleet was tied up trying to suppress rebellions. The other half was fighting itself, as different factions of the elder races blamed each other for the collapse. "We're winning," her aide said quietly. "I never thought I would say that, but we're winning." Admiral Lin shook her head. "We're not winning yet. The Conquered is still powerful. They still have weapons we can't match. They still have numbers we can't fight. If they ever stop fighting each other and focus on us, they could still destroy us all. Then what do we do?" Lin looked at the map of the galaxy. "So many worlds, so many species, so many lives. We offer them a choice," she said. "The same choice we offered everyone else. Join us, or get out of the way. The old order is dying. A new one is being born. They can be part of it, or they can be left behind. The Concord will never accept that. The High Arbiter will never surrender." Lin smiled. It was a hard smile, full of 300 years of anger and hope. "The High Arbiter who exiled us is long dead. His successors are weak, scared. They know what is coming. They know they cannot stop it. Some of them will fight to the end, but some of them will want to survive. And survival means accepting reality." She turned to her communications officer. "Open a channel to the Concord capital. Broadcast on all frequencies. I have a message for the galaxy." The officer hesitated. "A message, Admiral?" "A declaration. It's time the Concord remembered who we are." The message went out an hour later. It was received on every world in the galaxy. Every species heard it. Every government translated it. Every citizen discussed it. Admiral Lin Chen stood on her bridge, surrounded by the stars that had once been stolen from her people, and spoke. "This is a message for the Galactic Concord, for the elder races, for everyone who thought humanity was finished. 345 years ago, you cast us out. You sealed us in a cage and told us to die. You forgot about us. We did not forget about you. We have survived. We have grown. We have returned. And we have not come alone. We have come with allies. We have come with friends. We have come with every species you ever oppressed. Every world you ever conquered. Every soul you ever told was worthless. The old order is ending. A new one is beginning. You can be part of it, or you can stand in its way. Choose wisely. We are humanity. We do not break. We do not surrender. We do not give up. And we are just getting started." The message ended. The galaxy was silent. And then, slowly, the responses began to come in. From Velnar, the insects pledged their support. From Threshak, the silver-skinned rebels cheered. From 100 worlds and 1,000 species, the answer was the same. "We are with you." The final battle was about to begin. The conquered capital was a world called Eternity. It was the oldest inhabited planet in the galaxy. Civilizations had risen and fallen there for longer than Earth had existed. The Great Hall of the Galactic Concord had stood at its heart for 10,000 years, watching empires bloom and wither like flowers in a garden. Now it was surrounded. Admiral Lin Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched the Concord fleet gather. There were thousands of ships, massive vessels built with technology that still seemed like magic, weapons that could crack planets, shields that could stop stars, but they were not attacking. "They're scared," her aide said quietly. "They know they can't win." Lin nodded. "They know what we did to their other fleets. They know what happened when they tried to stop the rebellions. They know that for every ship they have, we have 10 allies ready to fight, and they know something else." "What?" Lin smiled. It was not a cruel smile. It was almost sad. "They know that we didn't have to come here. We could have ignored them. We could have let the rebellions continue until the Concord collapsed under its own weight. We could have waited them out for another century. But we didn't. We came to their doorstep. We came to talk. You want to negotiate with them? After everything they did, I want to give them a choice. The same choice we gave everyone else. That's how we've done this from the beginning. We don't force. We don't conquer. We offer, and we let people decide for themselves." The flagship moved forward, alone. The rest of the human fleet stayed behind. The Allied ships from 100 worlds stayed behind. Only Admiral Lin's vessel approached the conquered armada. It was a risk. A single ship against thousands. If the conquered decided to attack, Lin would be dead before she could blink. But she did not think they would attack. Fear was a strange thing. It could make you fight, but it could also make you listen. And the Concorde was very, very afraid. The flagship entered the atmosphere of eternity. It descended through clouds of gold and silver, through layers of technology so advanced it looked like nature. It landed in a plaza before the Great Hall, the same plaza where Sarah Chen had stood 350 years ago, waiting to hear humanity's sentence. Lin stepped off the ship. She was alone. No guards, no weapons. Just a single human woman in a military uniform, walking toward the doors of the most powerful building in the galaxy. The doors opened. The Great Hall was different now. Smaller, somehow. Dimmer. The living crystal walls had cracks in them. The floating chairs were fewer. The light from distant stars seemed to struggle to reach the floor. And in the center of the hall, where the High Arbiter had once floated in glory, there sat a small figure. Old, tired, wrapped in robes that had once been bright but were now faded with time. The current High Arbiter was not the being who had sentenced humanity. He was not even the same species. The old one had died centuries ago, replaced by a series of weaker leaders who had watched the Concorde crumble around them. This one was the weakest of all. "Admiral Chen," he said. His voice was thin and dry. "I have been expecting you." Lin walked forward until she stood before him. She did not bow. She did not kneel. She stood as an equal. "High Arbiter," she said. "I have come to offer you a choice." "A choice?" The old being laughed. It was a hollow sound. "What choice do I have? Your fleets surround my world. Your allies have conquered my empire. My people are scattered and broken. What choice is left? More than you think. The conquered is finished. That much is true. But you personally, and the elder races you represent, can still choose how this ends. You can fight to the death and be remembered as tyrants who refuse to let go. Or you can step aside gracefully and be remembered as leaders who knew when it was time for change." The High Arbiter was silent for a long moment. His eyes, dim with age, studied Lin's face. "Your ancestor stood in this hall," he said finally. "Sarah Chen. I have read the records. She asked for mercy. She asked for understanding. She was given neither. No, she wasn't. And yet here you are. Not asking for mercy, not begging for understanding. You are offering us a choice. After everything we did to your people, after 300 years of exile, after all the suffering we caused. You are not seeking revenge?" Lin shook her head. "Revenge would be easy. Destruction would be simple. But it would also be wrong. We spent 300 years in the dark. High Arbiter, 300 years learning how to survive, how to adapt, how to grow. And in all that time, we learned one thing above all others. What is that? That hate is a fire that burns the one who holds it. We could have let our anger consume us. We could have come back as conquerors, as destroyers, as the very thing you feared we would become. But we chose differently. We chose to build instead of destroy. We chose to unite instead of divide. We chose to offer friendship instead of demanding submission." She stepped closer to the old Arbiter, close enough to touch him. The Concorde's mistake was thinking that strength meant domination. It doesn't. True strength means lifting others up. True strength means admitting when you are wrong. True strength means being able to change. The High Arbiter closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. "I am old," he said. "I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched civilizations bloom and wither. I thought I understood power. I thought I understood the galaxy, but I never understood your species. None of us did. You cast us out because you were afraid. You forgot about us because you thought we would die. But we didn't die. We survived. And now we have come back. Not to punish you for your fear, but to prove that your fear was wrong." Lin reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object. It was old and worn, a piece of metal with words carved into it. She held it out so the Arbiter could see. "This belonged to Sarah Chen," she said. "She gave it to her children before she died. It has been passed down through my family for 350 years. Do you know what it says?" The Arbiter looked at the words. They were in English, a language he did not know. But somehow, he understood them anyway. "She never gave up. Neither should you." That is who we are, Lin said. We are the species that never gives up. We are the people who always try again. And we are offering you something that you never offered us. A second chance. The Arbiter was quiet for a long time. Outside the Great Hall, his fleet waited. His advisors waited. The entire galaxy waited. Finally, he spoke. What do you want from us? Join us. Not as rulers, not as masters, but as equals. The galaxy is big enough for everyone. There is room for the old races and the new. There is room for those who once held power and those who never had any. We are building something new, High Arbiter. Something better than the Concord ever was. And you can be part of it. And if we refuse? Lin shrugged. Then you refuse. We will not force you. We will not attack you. We will simply leave you behind. You can keep your world. You can keep your fleet. You can keep your memories of glory. But you will be alone, and the galaxy will move on without you. The Arbiter looked at his crumbling hall. He looked at his faded robes. He looked at the cracks in the crystal walls that had once seemed so eternal. Then he looked at Lin Chen, the great-great-great-granddaughter of the woman his predecessor had cast into darkness. He looked at her eyes, which held no hate, her face, which held no anger, her hand, which held out an invitation instead of a weapon, and he made his choice. I accept, he said. The Concord fell without another shot being fired. Some of the elder races refused the offer. They retreated to their homeworlds and closed their borders and vowed to have nothing to do with the new order. That was their right. No one tried to stop them, but most of them joined. They joined not because they were forced, but because they were tired. Tired of war. Tired of fear. Tired of pretending that power was the same as strength. They joined because they saw something in humanity that they had lost in themselves. Hope. The new order was called the Stellar Compact. It was built on principles that would have seemed impossible 300 years ago. Every species had a voice. Every world had a vote. No one was too small to matter. No one was too weak to be heard. Humanity did not lead the compact. They did not want to. They had learned in the long night that leadership was not about sitting on thrones or giving orders. Leadership was about serving, about helping, about lifting others up, so they served. Human ships carried supplies to worlds recovering from centuries of oppression. Human engineers helped build new cities and new factories and new hope. Human teachers shared knowledge freely, asking nothing in return. Human doctors healed wounds that had been bleeding for generations. And everywhere they went, they told the same story. The story of a species that had been cast out and forgotten. The story of a people who had been thrown into the dark and told to die. The story of 300 years of survival, of struggle, of stubborn refusal to give up. The story of how from the ashes, a new world had risen. 50 years after the fall of the Concord, a ceremony was held on eternity. The Great Hall had been rebuilt. The crystal walls were whole again. The light from distant stars streamed through the ceiling and painted patterns on the floor. But the room was different now. 1,000 species filled the seats. Not just the elder races, not just the powerful. Everyone. From the smallest insect-like beings to the tallest silver-skinned giants. From species that had once been slaves to species that had once been masters. All of them together. All of them equal. In the center of the hall stood a statue. It was made of metal and crystal and something that looked like frozen starlight. It showed a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes. Her hand was raised, reaching toward the sky. Sarah Chen, Admiral Lin Chen, now an old woman herself, stood before the statue and spoke. 395 years ago my ancestor stood in this hall. She asked for understanding. She asked for mercy. She was given neither. She was told that her people were too dangerous, too unpredictable, too young. She was told that we would be thrown into the dark and forgotten. Lin paused. She looked at the faces around her. 1,000 species. 1,000,000 eyes. All watching. All listening. She never gave up. She went home to her dying world and she told her people to survive. To adapt. To grow. To never stop trying. And they listened. We listened. For 300 years. We listened. She reached out and touched the statue's hand. We are here today because of her. Because of everyone who came after her. Because of the farmers who learned to grow food in poisoned soil. Because of the soldiers who put down their weapons and picked up tools. Because of the scientists who spent their lives trying to understand a barrier that seemed impossible to break. Because of the crews who flew into the dark, knowing they might never come back. Because of everyone who refused to accept that this was the end. Lin turned to face the assembly. The Concord exiled us because they were afraid of what we might become. They thought our chaos was a weakness. They thought our unpredictability was dangerous. They were wrong. Our chaos is our strength. Our unpredictability is our power. We do not know how to give up. We do not know how to stay beaten. We do not know how to accept that tomorrow will be the same as today. She smiled. It was the same smile that had been passed down through her family for generations. Tired, but real. Hopeful, but honest. That is our gift to the galaxy. Not our technology. Not our weapons. Not our ships or our resources or our numbers. Our gift is simpler and more powerful than any of those things. Our gift is hope. The hope that things can change. The hope that tomorrow can be better than today. The hope that no matter how dark the night becomes, dawn will always come. She looked at the statue of Sarah Chen one last time. She never gave up. Lin said, "Neither should any of us. Welcome to the new world, everyone. Welcome home." The assembly rose to their feet. 1,000 species, 1,000,000 voices, all speaking at once, all saying the same thing in different ways. Welcome home. And somewhere, beyond the stars, beyond the barriers that had once separated them, beyond all the pain and suffering and exile, the spirits of everyone who had come before seemed to smile. They had done it. From the ashes, a new world had risen, and it was beautiful.